afternoon of Tuesday, February 19th of 2008, 9-year-old Shannon Matthews was on her way home from school in her small hometown of Dewsbury, West Yorkshire. Westmore Junior School was just half a mile from Shannon's home, meaning her journey should have taken no more than 5 to 10 minutes. Yet hours went by and she was nowhere to be seen. At exactly 6:48 p.m., Shannon's mother contacted the West Yorkshire police to report her missing. Aided by friends and neighbors, a terrified Karen Matthews had already conducted an extensive search of the surrounding neighborhood. She was convinced her daughter had been abducted. Shannon's disappearance occurred just 9 months after that of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, a case which has horrified and enthralled the British public ever since. Keen to avoid repeated incident, West Yorkshire Police put together a 200-man task force headed up by Detective Superintendent Andy Brennan, and together they set about searching for Shannon. Over the course of the next few weeks, officers questioned over 1,500 motorists and searched almost 3,000 houses and other places of residence. When little progress was made, the task force swelled up to 250 police officers, 60 detectives from the UK's Criminal Investigation Department, and more than half of Britain's highly trained victim recovery dogs. It was the largest regional police investigation since the case of the Yorkshire Ripper, 30 years previously, and much like Madeleine McCann's disappearance, the search for Shannon captured national attention. One newspaper offered a reward of £20,000 for information leading to Shannon's safe return, an amount which more than doubled due to generous donations from the public. Numerous other public appeals were launched while Karen was invited to appear on a widely circulated morning show in order to raise awareness. She appeared on the show's March 7th edition, but after allowing Karen to appeal to the public for information, the presenters posited some rather accusatory questions. One implied that Karen's current boyfriend was responsible. Another suggested Shannon's biological father might be the one holding her. Karen defended both men, saying neither were capable of such a thing, but following the interview's conclusion, the public accusations continued. Karen's parents suggested that her boyfriend, 20-year-old Craig Meehan, was known to be a violent man with a short temper, while tabloid journalists pointed out the fact that Karen had borne 7 children to 5 different fathers. Coverage and commentary relating to the case sparked a great deal of public discussion on how it was being handled. Inevitably, Shannon's case was compared with Madeleine McCann's, and some argued that the media wouldn't have dared suggest a prim and proper middle-class family would be involved in their own daughter's disappearance. They claimed the interview on morning TV had cruel overtones, and that the presenter's questions went far beyond necessity, lifting the lid on an uncomfortable, class-based hypocrisy in British society. Yet while debate raged, the police task force was working itself into a state of exhaustion, and right when the arguments on class divides were reaching a boiling point, they made a stunning announcement. At approximately 12:30 p.m. on March 14th of 2008, police officers conducted a search of an apartment belonging to 39-year-old Michael Donovan. Donovan lived in the small village of Batley Carr, just a mile north of Dewsbury, and opening his door to a group of police officers, he became visibly nervous. The officers detained him, and while scouring his residence for any sign of their missing girl, they came across a small compartment under Donovan's bed. It was padlocked. When the officers cut off the lock and pried open the compartment, a collective sigh of relief could be heard. Lying curled up in the compartment, weak but still alive, was 9-year-old Shannon Matthews. Her 24-day ordeal was finally over. Michael Donovan was immediately arrested at the scene, while Shannon was placed under the protection of the police and local social services department. Many expected Shannon to be immediately returned to her mother, but questions were raised when the police exercised the rarely utilized Section 46 of the 1989 Children's Act, which allowed Shannon to remain in their care for up to 3 days. When these 3 days expired, Karen consented to her daughter being held by local family services on a purely voluntary basis. There, Shannon was questioned for several weeks, with the sessions lasting no longer than 10 minutes at a time to avoid undue stress and trauma. The interview was also made up to look like a school classroom, a move that often reassured other victims of abuse. The details of the police investigation remained confidential, but there were no surprises when Michael Donovan was charged with kidnapping. Yet a second arrest raised some serious questions as to how and why Shannon was abducted, questions which fed into the public's more lurid suspicions. On April 2nd of 2008, Karen Matthews' boyfriend, Craig Meehan, was arrested on suspicion of possessing indecent images of children. The arrest came after police searched Meehan's computer in connection with Shannon's disappearance, and he was later convicted on 11 counts of possessing indecent images of children. The revelation stunned the British public, but not nearly as much as the one that came just 4 days later. The arrest of Karen Matthews, Shannon's own mother, was front-page news all over the British Isles. Newspapers detailed how she'd been detained on the grounds of child neglect, as well as perverting the course of justice. Yet at her hearing in September of 2008, those charges ballooned to kidnapping and false imprisonment. The exact details of Shannon's abduction hadn't been made public yet, but nevertheless, the charges painted a grimly detailed picture of what had transpired. Karen Matthews had been complicit in the abduction of her own 9-year-old daughter. At Michael Donovan's trial in November of 2008, the court heard that whilst Shannon had been in captivity, she'd been drugged to keep her pliable and compliant. During the first 24 hours after she went missing, Shannon had been tied to a roof beam up in the small attic of Donovan's apartment and was only later transferred to the hiding place under his bed. The court later heard that Karen Matthews had been the plan's mastermind, claiming that they could make at least £50,000 from faking her daughter's abduction. Karen then reached out to the charity Madeline's Fund, named after Madeleine McCann, in an effort to pilfer funds intended for legitimate missing children's cases. Karen also believed that additional money could be fraudulently secured through public appeals and charitable donations. On November 13th, a forensic toxicologist told the court that tests on Shannon's hair showed she'd received weekly doses of the sedative temazepam for almost 2 years. Some believed that this was to raise Shannon's tolerance to the drug, diminishing the chances of an overdose when the time came to fake her abduction, while others argued it was routine treatment at the hands of a neglectful, uncaring mother. When Michael Donovan took the stand, he claimed that Karen had asked him to look after her daughter for a few days, saying he'd be handsomely rewarded if he did so. He also claimed to have wanted to back out of the scheme when he realized what it actually entailed, but was so frightened by Karen and her abusive boyfriend that he complied with their demands. Karen Matthews was the next to take the stand, where she denied having anything to do with her daughter's disappearance. This was in direct contradiction to her initial admissions that she'd been central to the plot. She claimed that Craig Meehan, her then-boyfriend, was the plot's mastermind, and that he'd ordered her to take the blame for what had happened. In response, the prosecution reminded the courtroom that Karen Matthews had told 5 different stories from that point, each detailing a different chain of events, and could therefore not be trusted to tell the truth. Her testimony was characterized as lie after lie after lie. The truth was clear for all to see. Karen Matthews was a monster, a woman who'd put her own daughter through unimaginable suffering, all for monetary gain. On December 4th of 2008, Karen and Michael Donovan were both found guilty of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. The plan had been to fake a scenario in which Michael Donovan appeared to rescue Shannon from Dewsbury Market, in which case he'd be eligible for the £50,000 reward. The money would then be split 50-50 between Donovan and Karen Matthews. Their conviction came with an 8-year sentence. Karen was released in April of 2012 after serving only half her sentence. On the other hand, Michael Donovan served only a third of his term after it became increasingly clear that he'd been intimidated into carrying out Karen's plan. Shannon received intense psychiatric treatment in the aftermath of her ordeal. Being abducted and drugged would traumatize anyone, but young Shannon had to wrestle with the fact that it was her own mother who'd engineered something so diabolical. She was placed into foster care, raised far away from the glare of the media, and has since been given a new identity. The same applied to Karen Matthews' other children, who had all relocated to different parts of the country in order to begin new lives. It's the least they could have been offered. the only silver lining to a dark cloud which will hang over Dewsbury for a very long time. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.